talk a little bit about this whole idea of teaching and learning and teaching, and are people learning? And there's been a lot of buzz in the media lately. Who saw this article that came out May 15th in the Chronicle? Did anyone see that? Yeah, it's such a catchy title, this crisis of confidence. There's concerns about higher education right now. The rising costs of college, the declining state appropriations, increasing reliance on adjunct instructors, concerns about whether tenure is really a good idea or not, depending on whether you have it. The answer varies. The increased use of online learning and distance education, the prevalence of that as ways to save money potentially, and the increasing pressures that puts on a lot of us. And then that somehow college is supposed to be just about training students for a specific job, and there's a lot of debate out there. So there's a huge bunch of issues going around. One of the biggest concerns, though, that keeps coming up is that students aren't learning. This big idea, students aren't learning. Who saw this book? Has anyone finished reading it all the way through? I'm almost all the way through with it. Their concern, Aram and Roxa, is that after 4 years of college, students haven't advanced substantially in their ability to think critically or analyze or reflect, or the way they put it, or it sounds like really do much of anything. So there's a concern. What is college doing for our students? Is it worth it? Is it of value? There's a lot of concern about that. So the question then is, what's going on? I find it very unlikely that students are learning nothing. The question is, are they learning what we think we're teaching them? So this is it's a big question. The big thing, though, I think that's part of the problem is that our current education system was designed for a world that no longer exists. It was created in the pre-industrial to industrial age with a factory metaphor for students to be turned out one by one according to a specified set of tolerances. If you've ever seen Sir Ken Robinson do his TED Talk, he talks about why is it that we put them through school according to date of manufacture, which is age cohorts. And then we expect that they will all come out the other side uniform. And an A means acceptable, and a B means slightly blemished, and a C means put them in the bargain bin, and a D means toss them out. So this is one of the issues, that we're operating out of this factory metaphor that may or may not be relevant. And in fact, we could argue now we're living in a very different world, and an accelerating world. And I'm going to show you this video, provided that all goes well. And I'm going to ask you afterward to think a little bit about it. But I want to show it. It's about 5 minutes long. And I'm going to ask you at the end of it to think about what implications this has for learners and learning. Okay, so we live in an accelerating world. Who's seen that video? I love that video, a bunch of you. So you get to see it again, and now you're the experts in the room. So when I ask you to talk to each other, everybody find somebody that just raised their hand. So this was just a reminder in case for some reason I couldn't get the video to play, the things that I thought were particularly fascinating. The fact that there's more information generated in 1 year than in the previous 5,000 years. I love that. I don't even know what an exabyte is, other than a really, really, really big number. So the question then is, what does this mean for learning and for education? And but I want to have you talk to each other a little bit, and I'm going to ask you, because I can't stand talking at you for an hour or whatever we have, and so I want you to think with each other a little bit, what does all this mean for learning and for education? And so I'm going to give you about a minute or so in the interest of time, because I know we're a little bit behind, and then I'll call you back together and see what you think. So given that video is kind of setting the stage, and we're thinking about learning and learners, what does that mean for learning and for education? So go ahead and talk to each other, and I'll call you back together in another minute or so. All right, that's like the best sound in the whole world. When you say, everybody talk to your neighbor, and you actually do, it's a really cool thing. I spoke at the Medical College of Wisconsin recently and said to them, turn to your neighbor, and there was a lot of silence. And they were really concerned and said, do you mean it? Yeah, I mean it. Talk to your neighbor. Okay. So anyway, who's going to tell me something about what this means for learning and education? There's a hand way back there. And I'm hard of hearing, so I get to go running around and see what you say. So you may have to scream.
Content is less important. You can always look up the information. It's the critical thinking, communication, and
Yeah, absolutely. The content has become less important because we can look up what we need. And so it's communication and collaboration and critical thinking that's a lot more important.
You have that aspect that you cannot teach or learn in isolation, the microbiology, it has to be interdisciplinary.
Sure, we can't teach or learn in isolation. That in fact, we have to become very interdisciplinary, our discipline interfacing with others.
They have to be critical about what they're looking up, though. And that's one of the things they don't, and that's how we can help them to understand what is valid information. How do we know that? How did they arrive at that?
Absolutely. They've got to be critical about it. We can't uncritically drink out of the fire hose of information. There's a lot of information out there, and that's a more important role for us potentially than giving them content. There's a hand up here.
I think the other thing is to drive, now that you have the facts, how do you use them? And if you're swallowing from that fire hose, then you have to make some contextual perspective discussions.
Absolutely. So it's not just what are the facts, but how do we use them that is important. Because the students don't necessarily know what the important context is or how to use those facts.
Yes, and I think we have to change our education at its core. And the core of our education used to be a textual approach. Now we live in a visual world, in a digital world, and our students are visually illiterate. They don't have skills of visual thinking. And I think this is a great idea because ASM, now at ASM there is new journal is open now, and I just got across it on the internet, and it's a visual journal where they teach techniques in microbiology just by showing how to do things, not by writing one page after another. That can consume a long period of time to digest.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, that it's much more of a visual world now rather than a text-based world. Everything is done with picture. Picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So the students need to also be taught fluency with visuals and pictures. And it was mentioned there's a visual journal out there now, visual ways to teach concepts that are becoming increasingly important. So I know that everybody could continue to add things for quite a long time, but I want to make sure that we keep moving on. So absolutely, it's all of these things. It's how do we drink from the fire hose without being blown away? How do we know what to do with what we find? How do we think critically about it? How do we engage with others? These are all things that this accelerating world implies. I love this picture, so I'm putting it up. And the main point that I see is we've got changing times and we have changing learning needs. And this was written by a man named Daniel Pink. Boy, that's a pathetic laser pointer. Daniel Pink, who wrote a book called A Whole New Mind. And he talks about this shift from left-brain skills and left-brain thinking that's happening to more of a right-brained world and right-brain skills that are necessary. So as we've gone from the agricultural age, the learning needs were very different for somebody working in that time, to the industrial age, which is when we generated our modern system of education. The skills needed were very different. To the information age, or the knowledge workers, the people that program computers, a lot of engineering, that needed logic-driven or left-brain skills, to finally, he says, we're entering this conceptual age where we need concept workers who are creative, they're flexible, they're adaptable, and they're right brain. And so he illustrates this with this, I think it's a doctor artist. I think that's a stethoscope. The idea, though, that we really need to be thinking creatively about all the work that we do. It's not just a left brain world anymore. It really is a right brain world. And where I want to go with this a little bit is probably preach to the choir a little bit. You guys all know a lot of things about improvements in teaching and learning, and then talk a little bit about some of the creative things that we've tried to do in some of my classrooms. So this idea, changing times, changing needs. So the critical question here is what happens if the learning needs are changing, but by and large our teaching style is not? So again, many people here, you wouldn't be here if you weren't trying to change the way that you taught. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care deeply about whether your students are learning or not. But the fact is that we're all surrounded by colleagues who aren't necessarily changing the way that they're teaching, who aren't necessarily doing new things. And so this is the question, is what happens if the needs are changing, but the teaching is not? So we actually know quite a bit about how people learn, and this is intentionally a very complex slide. I'm not asking you to dissect it. I will post these if you're interested. It's kind of an interesting mind map. But learning is very complicated. There have been many studies, all the learning sciences, the cognitive sciences, the neurosciences. We know a lot about learning, and it involves, here we go, technologies, social interactions, cognitive skills, attitudes, multiple intelligences, all kinds of stuff. So that's how people learn versus the way we tend to teach. So there's an attitude that's kind of implicit in the way that we have taught for a very long time, which is this empty-headed child, and we stuff the topics right in there. We just shove it right in, and the kid's sitting there all happy. Or not, right? So the lecture, I love this picture. It just gives me the, like, yeah. Lectures. The way that we tend to teach by shoving that, transmitting that content right into their poor little brains. And we know that there are consequences of this. So their percentage recall, I don't know why this goes up to 120. I'm not sure if students would begin to imagine new things after having a lecture, and therefore they could potentially have 120% recall. I'm not sure. So whoever made this graphic, it's an interesting graphic. But right after a lecture, they have 100% recall. I'm wondering which of my students actually have 100% recall right after lecture, but okay, suppose they start with 100% recall. By 5 days, they're down to only about 20% recall. So 5 days later, they've forgotten 80% of what I told them in a lecture, which is really depressing. And if you're thinking about time and money and resources, and why are we sitting there with them in the class during a semester when 5 days later they're going to forget 80% of what we did? But why bother, right? So this is a...
Can I ask a question?
What's that?
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Sure.
If we taught 1/5 of the amount in the original lecture, would it stay 100%?
Oh, sure. Who knows? If we taught 1/5 of it, right? So if we reduce the content quite a bit, it would certainly improve the retention a lot. And if we repeat, absolutely. But I think we all know, though, I mean, that when you look at this, the pyramid, the retention pyramid, right, 5% of what's lectured is remembered, versus if you add reading or if you add audio visual, if you give a demonstration, or if you have a really good demonstration with a mishap where something goes horribly wrong, then they'll actually really remember it. I distinctly recall a chemistry teacher doing a striptease on top of a podium to teach us singing a song about thermodynamics. That was another thing entirely. You give them a discussion group, right? Practice by doing all this other stuff. So there's ways that we can improve their retention, but the lecture is the very worst one of all. And yet we do it. So we know it doesn't work, but why do we do this? And probably, nobody here lectures, I'm sure. Of course I do sometimes, of course, right? But there's reasons why we do it. It's a great way to convey a lot of information. It's a good way to present things in an organized fashion. We can go through the pros and cons of lectures versus other types of teaching. So it's not that lectures are just uniformly bad, but we cling to them even when they don't work, even when it isn't the best possible method. So why do we do it? Well, there's a simple answer. It's what we know, right? Few of us were taught how to teach. So this is what we've seen. We've seen it work. We've seen it work this way for a really long time. So we do it because it's the way it's always been done. And we might be very, very critical in our research, and sometimes we're not that critical in our other things we do. So it's how we've seen things done. But really, more importantly, it's related to these ideas that we have about who and what is a professor. So we've got professor, glasses, bow tie, tweed jacket. This is a professor. This is a cartoon from a game that I found online called Energy Smackdown. And one of the characters in this game is Professor Bookright, or Professor B. That could be me, that's my last name, right? Professor B is the gatekeeper of all knowledge. And he has glasses and a tie and a coat with the leather patches, which we couldn't see on Harrison Ford's picture. So this is our gatekeeper of all knowledge. Now, what this implies, of course, is that the professors are experts. And we used to be, right? When we lived in an age of knowledge scarcity, and information scarcity, we were the gatekeepers of all knowledge. But there's a problem. We live in this accelerating age, and there's that fire hose out there with, what was it, 4-point-something exabytes of information being generated this year, which is more than the last 5,000 years. That's a lot. So our role is changing, right? And this, I love this cover from Time, which is, says that the person of the year, oops, I'm supposed to use this laser pointer. The person of the year is you. Yes, you. You control the information age. Welcome to your world. Now, this is what our students live with. This is what they see. This is how they grow up. So our role is changing. Excuse me, Mrs. Warren, Google begs to differ. Right? I can be sitting in class, doing my thing, pretending to be an expert, and any one of the punks in class is going to be able to do this with their mobile phone at any moment, right? So we were the experts. Now, if you Google Google, this is great. You get 3.9 billion hits in 0.09 seconds if you Google Google. There's a lot of information out there. If you Google my particular area of expertise, which is soil carbon, you get 2.4 million results in a half a second. I don't know that much about my own field. And I have a PhD, and I've been researching it for 20 years. And that doesn't matter. There's all kinds of things on here that I had no idea existed, like put the carbon back where it belongs, the Soil Carbon Coalition. There's probably another one down here later that's like free the carbon. I'm sure. But the point is, I'm not the gatekeeper of knowledge anymore, even in my own field where I have a degree and I'm supposed to be the expert. So we can't compete with Google. I can't compete with Google. So what do we do? So we have to rethink our role. This you guys all know. Has anyone actually read this book? I found this cover. I thought it was awesome, Teaching with Your Mouth Shut. Okay, there's a few hands up. So I'm embarrassed to admit I haven't read it. But now that I found it, I really want to go read it because it just looks like such a great title. So we have to rethink our role. Teach with our mouth shut, something like that. Right, so this one, who's seen classrooms like this? There's some in Minnesota. There's one in Kansas. There's a few going up. There's one in Wisconsin that's going to be built in the School of Nursing. But these high-tech kind of scale-up classrooms. Does anyone see the teacher? I think it's like Where's Waldo? But she's not wearing stripes. I think it's a she. I can't tell. I think this person is the teacher, because I think this is where there's a podium area. But this is this great classroom where the students actually get to talk to each other and interact. It's one of the biggest problems that I have on the Wisconsin campus is I could teach a class with 400 students if only I had a place for them to sit and talk to each other. You guys just saw, you tried to talk to each other with these chairs and you have to turn around and it's awkward and you can't write anything down. So we've got to rethink our role, rethink what it means to teach in a classroom. We have to reframe our job. This is nothing new to you guys. I don't like this whole sage on the stage versus guide on the side. I'm not sure why. I just don't like those catchphrases. But it's certainly what a lot of people hear. So we have to rethink of ourselves, not so much as experts and content providers, but as coaches or expert learners. You got to figure that if we have a PhD, we got it in something, and it is an advanced degree in learning. So even if I can't keep up with Google and soil carbon, I do know how to learn, and I can help my students learn how to learn. So I still have a job to do. I haven't not giving it all up to Google. So reframing our job. So the thing is, we hear about this all the time, right? Just, easy. Go completely redo everything you've been doing for 30 years, no problem. So how do we do it though, right? We've got to let go of all hope of being primary content provider. We know that the fire hose is out there. We have to surrender to the fire hose, figure out what to do with it. We've got to let go of our ideas about what a classroom should look like. We've got to let go of our ideas about what learning is supposed to look like. And we've got to deliberately design our learning environments that are aligned with how people actually learn. So I just was in a newspaper recently, but they asked me, I don't know what I was going to do at Florida or something like that. And I said, it's not natural to sit in a classroom and memorize a textbook. That's not natural. That's not how we learn. So we want to deliberately design environments that are aligned with how people actually learn. Does anyone know what that is? It's a Montessori classroom, right, absolutely. I keep thinking how cool it would be if in college the students would have the option to sort of go with what interests them and then go further and further with that instead of having a rigidly prescribed, factory-driven curriculum. I know that's kind of radical, but isn't that what the internet is? especially with open source and open learning environments. So it's kind of cool. So thinking about deliberately designing Montessori ideas. Okay, so yeah, how? Like, right? Great, easy. Just deliberately design them. So I keep thinking of this, and the way that we're going to go about doing this, going back to that whole creativity thing, is embracing education in this wiki world. So we live in a wiki world. The fire hose is out there. We've got to rethink how we do it. And the learning that happens is very, very social. It's always been social, but it's even more social now. The students learn by working with each other. The way they naturally learn at home is if they want to try something, they join a community and practice online. Say they want to learn programming. They join a community and practice online, and they try programming. And when they get stuck, they send out a all-points bulletin for help, and somebody texts them or chats them or emails them back and says, here's how to get unstuck. And then they get unstuck and they keep going. It's very, very social, and it's not done in a classroom. It's mobile, so there's all kinds of cool stuff going on with mobile learning, augmented reality, getting the students outside and not just sitting in a classroom. Some really neat stuff happening that I've seen with identifying birds in trees and historical events and kind of cool stuff like that. Mobile learning, and then it's gamified, which is not a negative thing. Games are amazing. Games are fun, and they're engaging. There's a great TED Talk by Seth Pribach. Has anyone seen that one? He talks about the game layer on top of the world. Gamification, or using game dynamics, is happening everywhere around us. Your credit card companies know this. They give you points when you do what they want you to do. Right? You get gold stars for doing different stuff. This is game dynamics, and it completely drives our behavior. And we can use this to our advantage when we work with our students. They will do anything for 1 extra credit point, right? They will do even more for a gold star. They will replay levels of a game 8 million times in order to go from a bronze star to a gold star in terms of achievement. And these are games like Angry Birds, which is all about physics, right? And so they will do things you wouldn't believe if you just wrap it in a game packaging and leverage game dynamics. So we've got to embrace it. Be really creative. So use creativity to engage them. So here's one example of a class that I taught a couple of years ago. It's a microbiology, soil biology class, actually. And these students are presenting their final projects. And one of the key things here is that I allowed them to be as creative as they wanted, and they had to do their project for an authentic audience. And I think that's a key thing. It's really boring to present something just to me. They don't care. They're not at stake. It's not interesting. They know I'm going to read it. I'm going to give them a grade. I'm never going to think about it again. They're going to produce it. They're going to get a grade, and they're never going to think about it again. But what they're doing here is actually she's singing to her peers. And she is making them sing along with her, which is probably why this one at least looks very unhappy. But she wrote a song about endospores and endospore survival in the soil, and it's on YouTube. It's the endospore song. It's about sporulation, and it's about survival in harsh environments. And so you can go and you can sing along too. I don't remember the tune, or I would be happy to sing it for you. I have the mic, right? But this whole idea, rock me mama, I'm your endospore, this is creative. And this is an authentic audience. She put it out there on YouTube, and it has actually gotten 4,500 views. So that's 4,500 people that now know something about the life of a gram-positive bacterium in the soil, which I think that's pretty cool, because I couldn't have done that, not nearly as well as Allison did. And then my department actually showcased it at our Christmas party, and Allison and her friend came and sang it for us and tried to make us do a sing-along for the faculty the Christmas party as well. So that was creativity and an authentic audience. Other students made Wikipedia pages and actually posted something brand new. Other students made brochures to hand out to golf course managers. One girl invented a campaign for green lawns, for more environmentally friendly lawns. They've done K-12 lesson plans, but it's an authentic audience, and it really gets them engaged, and they're very creative. Then there's one of my favorites, which is this whole idea of, like I said, using games to engage them. So this is a game called the Endgame, which we spent about 1.5 years developing. I worked with a team of people at the University of Wisconsin in our academic technology group, And we put out this board game, and it's actually just gone to print today. And we're distributing it free in Creative Commons. And it is designed to teach students about the nitrogen cycle, which they hate learning. Now, I don't know if any of you can get them to love it, but I didn't love it when I first learned it. The students are confused by it. It's usually just a two-dimensional presentation. It almost always has a cow in the picture. And the students just don't get it, right? It's a bunch of pools and arrows and things they have to memorize. And it took me 3 times in 3 different classes before I could figure out what it was when I was a student. And I study it now. But even so, it's tough. So we said, well, let's make a game out of it. And when I first looked at the cycle, I said, well, it looks a little bit like Chutes and Ladders. So let's make a game out of it. And one of the key things is that it's not just a two-dimensional representation, it's actually a system. And there's all kinds of things influencing what happens in that system. And we said, well, let's see if we can get the students to think in systems thinking instead of just memorizing a bunch of terms. So we created cards. These are agents. And the agents actually move the nitrogen around the cycle. And so they have environmental tolerances. The little skull means it's an obligate anaerobe, so if the environment goes aerobic, it will die. And the students have to figure that out. There's resources that it needs. This is fixed carbon resources. This is carbon dioxide. And it moves different numbers of nitrogen based on how efficient it is. And so we looked these things up, and I actually used the students to help study this and figure out what the cards should say on them. We had a fantastic graphic designer that actually painted all these from electronic micrographs. And then we have events. And the events change the environment. So if you trample the soil, it makes it anaerobic because the oxygen can't get down in there. Acid rain dumps nitrate into the soil. Sudden downpours flush nitrate out of the nitrate pool. So there are real life events that happen in the nitrogen cycle. So the students have to play these cards and play the bacterial agents, collect the resources, and try to beat each other around the nitrogen cycle. And they have a blast. So this is an earlier test of a much older version of the game. But these guys were just talking smack and getting down into it and talking about how they're going to fertilize the blank out of you guys. And they're going to, I mean, they were just really, they were so getting into it. And we couldn't get them to stop playing the game. They missed their next classes. And it wasn't just because we gave them pizza, because the pizza was all gone by this point. They really enjoyed playing the game, and we were surprised. And so we were really thinking, well, what impact does this game? They play it for about an hour, and we're going to make it available to them, put it on reserve, because they liked it that much. But we looked first at, does it actually influence their ability to say anything about the nitrogen cycle? So this is a student that when we asked him in a pre-test, before he saw the cycle, before he played the game, draw it. And he said, yeah, not so much. And then at the end, afterward, and the game was put away, and they've been playing it for about an hour, they play it in teams, said, draw it again. And this student now was able to draw the cycle. The negatives and the ions aren't right, but this person got it. So it has an impact. This is another one. The pre-drawing is, I don't know. And look, I don't know where the dog came from. I think it's because one of the cards is actually a coyote peeing on a tree. It's the mineral fertilizer, so it's adding nitrogen in a mineral, in more or less mineral form. So this is like after just playing this game for about an hour, they've got this pre and post down. Now maybe 2 days later, 80% of this is going to be gone. This is obviously short-term memory, not long-term memory, but still. I mean, this was impressive. I thought this was impressive. I have a master's student now that's studying this. She's studying the impact of a game like this that's interesting on students' attitude towards science and on their motivation to learn something like the nitrogen cycle, which is usually considered really boring and icky. So we have that. We also have direct impact on their content or their topic understanding. So this student basically understood the processes involved versus just the molecular species. So they said that they could initially draw the molecular species, but then they understood the processes better. Some of these are actually students that are grad students that study it. Sometimes not these responses. We actually played it with our faculty in the soil science department who study the nitrogen cycle, and they learned something from the game. This one had put an image in mind of processes and their ordering, so it's maybe more of a visual learner. But they enjoyed the board as well. This one here, again, having a better understanding of outside sources and outside influences. So they had those events that were impacting the nitrogen cycle. So they're learning more than just how to draw a circle and put dogs and fluxes and arrows in it. They are getting some content learning. And so what we discovered from this is that there is an impact of just a game. It's not just a game. It had substantial impacts on their knowledge of the topic. So they were playing in teams. They had to use the vocabulary in order to talk to each other about the strategies that they wanted to use to beat the other team. So they were practicing. They had to understand what each of the organisms was capable of doing and why it did that. They had to understand what effect the different events were going to have on the system. I didn't show all the messy handwriting, but there are a lot of impacts on just their critical thinking, their systems thinking. They really mentioned when we asked them at the end, how did this change your thinking? And they said, well, now I see it as a system. Now I understand how all the parts fit together and how all the processes relate to the external factors. And then we saw some really surprising other impacts as well. They had a lot of ownership over the game, and they wanted to modify it. So the game designers call this modding. And you can do this with video games. The students were all set to design their own cards and design their own events. And one of them said, well, what would happen if, say, suppose you had a dead buffalo, or a buffalo wanders in and dies? Then you could have extra carbon resources, and so there should be a card that says that. And they wanted to make their own cards, and these are realistic events. So they really enjoyed that. And then just the fact that they're socially interacting with one another. We thought hard about putting this online as a digital game instead of a board game, and we really were surprised by the positive impacts of having this be students playing together, interacting with one another in a group. So there was a lot of impacts of it's just a game. And even better, they had fun. Now, I've been really lately realizing the importance of simply having fun. Science is supposed to be fun. It doesn't just have to be dry and boring, and we don't have to be like those medical students that just stare at each other when you say talk to each other. It's fun. So the students are saying the nitrogen cycle is cool. The game added complexity to my understanding. It altered my understanding in that learning the end cycle was more fun. So again, like I said, I have a grad student now that's looking at how important is it that they're having fun? Are we supposed to keep them down in the classroom, or can we let them have a little fun? So it was fun. And overall, I would say this is one of the best measures of success, to have the students say, I want a copy. They want to keep playing this game that is a learning game about the nitrogen cycle. Who would have thought? Right? So we've been really surprised about this, and it's made a believer out of me, at least as far as the value of games. This is a game that is about a cycle. We've had students suggest phosphorus cycle, carbon cycle. We've had other ones suggest biochemical pathways. The game mechanic is what's a lot of fun. And the game mechanic is out there. It's Creative Commons. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to talk to you about it. But it was a success. Now, I want to turn a little bit to something that I think is even more important than just games and creativity and engaging them. And it's something that I thought a lot about, which is this idea of trusting the students. We hear a lot about the millennial generation as digital natives. We hear a lot and think a lot about our students. We saw that picture earlier of the teacher stuffing knowledge and books into the student's mind, which implies an assumption about our students that may or may not be true, especially nowadays. I heard some statistics recently that little girls are becoming reproductively mature earlier and earlier, 9 years old. They're getting their first periods. Kids are growing up faster. So pedagogy, right, it means teaching children. Andragogy means teaching adults. Adults learn differently than children learn. Children do tend to take in information kind of unquestioningly and more like a sponge, but adults do not. And college students are somewhere in between. They may not have any idea, and from day to day they might be more like one than the other. But they're trying to figure this out. And I think it's really important to consider that. What does that mean? That we're actually teaching adults. They're adult in many ways. So I'm not going to show this video because I don't want to take the time to. But who's seen this one? It's a great video, right? The Michael Wesch, the vision of our students today. But I do want to give you a chance to talk to each other again, because I've been talking at you now for another 15 or 20 minutes, which means your attention can no longer handle it, right? And you have to do something else all of a sudden. Okay, so talk to your neighbor a little bit. I'm going to call you back in another minute or so, but think about, when you think about the millennial generation, who do you think of? Who do you think of as our students today? The good, the bad, the ugly, whatever it is. And so who is it that we've got in our classrooms, and why should we or shouldn't we trust them? And what does it mean that they are almost adults? So talk to each other, wake up again, and I'll call you back in a couple minutes. All right, so who are our students today? Who's got an answer? Because you'll be talking about this, I'm sure, for the next several days, but what comes to mind immediately? And no four-letter words, please.
Well, they don't know any strangers. They're comfortable talking to anyone.
Right on. Yeah, they're comfortable talking to anyone. They don't know any strangers. It's actually really funny you said that. I accidentally typed the wrong phone number in to text a colleague of mine, and I got a text back, and it said in completely awful, I was going to take a screenshot just so I could show it, and really text like from a 13-year-old, I don't know you, my name is Pace. I don't know you, but hi. I was like, wow. It turns out that it was my colleague's son, and he had given his cell phone to his son. And I want to tell him, do you know that your 13-year-old son is just texting back whoever happens to text him with a wrong number? And I said, sorry, Pace, I'm a friend of your dad's. I got the wrong number. And he wrote back and said, oh, that's okay. You're absolutely right. They don't know any strangers. Everybody's a potential friend. Anyway, what else about them? No one wants to top that one. Yeah.
They're multitaskers. They can multitask.
They absolutely are multitaskers. I'm doing all right, though, here. I've got laser pointer advancer, multiple microphones.
They think they're multitasking.
That, yeah. Yes, so they are multitaskers, which may or may not be a good thing. I try to work with them on the idea of convergent multitasking versus divergent multitasking. And I'm serious, actually. I've heard of that as an actual concept, and I work that in my classrooms where I give them something to do while they're listening to a guest speaker or me or whoever, and that something to do helps focus their attention because they need tools to help focus their attention. And so convergent multitasking can work really well. We give them a half sheet that's a worksheet that's just simply, what are you learning? What are 3 things you've learned from today? And they have to actually pay attention in order to answer those questions. They're just very open-ended questions. It's really easy to grade them because there's no wrong answer. They just have to do it. So it can help because they're multitaskers. Is there another hand over here? In the back.
They want meaning.
They what?
They want meaning.
They want meaning?
Something.
Relevance and meaning, yeah. Which may or may not be different now than in the past. But I read a statistic that was, 2% of the students are going to go on to grad school, which means 98% of them don't love learning for learning's sake, which I can't get. It took me a long time to figure that out. I was shocked. Like, what do you mean? They don't just want to learn about soil. Come on. Yeah, they want meaning, they want relevance, they want what they're learning to be useful. Absolutely. Anything else?
Along that line, they only want to learn what is necessary.
Yeah. Right. Well.
When I go off on tangents to put it applied to the real world,
Right.
they're going, is that going to be on the test?
Right. Well, it's
How it is real.
absolutely. They only want to learn what's necessary. Potentially a consequence of that fire hose, right? If there's a fire hose out there, then please God, tell me what I'm actually supposed to know. That, and they really see a difference between what happens in the classroom and the rest of the world. I don't know why we call college not the real world, and the rest of the world is the real world. I mean, it is their real world while they're there.
There's someone that we never been, and that is our main challenge. That we never been ourselves. They have different lives that we never experienced before because they live in new era of technology.
Sure.
That we never had.
Right, we're not digital natives, so they'll never be like us, we'll never be like them, and it really is a very different divide, different kind of student. There was a hand back here, I think. No, okay, way in the back. Yeah, absolutely. So they're very willing to try new things. They are very open. They are multitaskers. Let's see, I'm going to move us along, though. So there's good things and there's bad things. I've put some of the bad things because a lot of times, depending on what audience you pick, you get a laundry list of really nasty things about the millennials, or you get a laundry list of really great things about them. There's a lot of very good things, and I should put more to balance it out. They live very structured lives, so they're very used to following rules. They're willing to try new things. they're friendly, they're socially aware, they're very social. They're also entitled, right? That's a lot of complaints people have had about them. The whole idea of Velcro parents, which is going beyond helicopter parents. You have the parents you have to peel off now that won't let go at all. Some people have called them apathetic. I don't believe that that's the case necessarily. I think it's that fire hose phenomenon. How do you deal with a fire hose of information without being overwhelmed? How do you know how to approach being an activist? They can be very challenging. They're very confident. Many of them come from small families. They're protected or they're only children. They have no problem challenging adults and saying, I don't believe you, or tell me, you've got to prove to me why that's so. Some people say they can lack people skills. It might be that multitasking. They are easily distracted. However, they are also extremely interesting. They want to learn, they want relevance, and they can be deeply engaged. So for as much as they might seem like they're multitasking, anybody that's watched them go into a video game and sit there for 8 hours without moving knows that they can be deeply engaged, and they aren't just easily distracted. So they can be engaged. So this is something I want to show a little bit of other data we're collecting right now, trying to understand a little bit more who our students are in the classroom, and work with them to do some faculty development, kind of from the student's perspective and the student's voice. And so this is just a background survey that we give them in all of my classes. So I have thousands of students that have filled this out. Ask them the question, is there anything you want us to know about you that makes you unique? And what are the most important skills and things that you think you're going to need in your future? So to get a sense of what do they think they need, and really come from the asking them who they are, trying to get a sense of them as individuals, not just students in a factory setting of education. So this one, I'm going to read them because I know they're kind of hard to see. I watched an entire lecture series of a Harvard philosophy class online. I graduated from a class of 35. I'm an Army combat medic, and I've already saved 3 lives in Iraq. Go back one. No, I did that. Oh, sorry. My glasses, which I don't wear often, make me look like Gandhi. I was born on Christmas Day. My favorite sound is the sound of ice cracking on a lake in the middle of winter, which if you don't come from the upper Midwest, you wouldn't have any idea what that is, but it's really very pretty. I know how to log roll. I'm pretty good at math, but I hate doing it. Is that interesting or unique? I'm an international student from Korea. And our international students very often are very proud, and that's the thing that they tell us about that makes them unique. So these are interesting students. They have all kinds of stuff they could do. I mean, it goes on and on. There's another one that said if I could eat cereal for the rest of my life, I would. I'm a triplet. I'm a twin. But ask them the skills that they think they need. And I get surprised again, because I am guilty as anyone of assuming that I think I know what skills they need and that they're just clueless, right? Because they're 18. How could they possibly know? So I need to practice my working with others skills. I tend to work very independently. I also need to work on being wrong, because I won't always be right. Perfect millennial. The ability to critically think and write. They know they need to be able to think critically. They know they need to be able to write. Diligence and practice. Love that one. The ability to write well and to present ideas to others in a clear and concise manner. I think communication skills and reasoning skills will be the most important because they're useful no matter what field I enter. Now, these are students, and it goes on and on and on, and it is impressive what they think they need. And this is my favorite. I think the desire to learn is a key part in success in the future. Also, the determination to never give up. There's always new information, so it's good to always be learning. So these are not unmotivated students. These aren't students that just want to know what they need to know for the test. Yes, they do, right, because they want to get an A, but we've trained them for that. They really want to be able to be productive members of society. So one thing I want to mention then is, as I start to close down here, is to get at this. We've tried this low-stakes courses, so we want to encourage this motivation of these students. We want to encourage them to be independent in their learning. And so we have a class that's exploring biology. It's 1 credit, meets once a week. It's entirely guests and research panels that come in, and the students have a chance to think deeply about the foundational concepts in biology. And I have been really surprised at what's been coming out of this class. We've got a paper that we're about to submit, or the postdoc, related to what impact low-stakes courses like this have. One of the few classes that taught me how to think rather than what to think. Class was about asking questions. I'm used to being spoon-fed information. So this is a student that was excited about being taught how to think. Instead of being forced to learn information so we could regurgitate it and do well on the test, we were just asked to listen and ask questions. So this student wasn't stressed out, allowed her to really listen, understand the big picture, and make her own opinions. So these are the kinds of things that I always wish my students were saying and thinking. And yet, with this low-stakes course, they really were able to. And then the second set of quotes here, that with these interesting topics, it generates some motivation to learn. This is the Montessori idea. If you give them something that intrigues them, that piques their interest, they will keep going and keep going and keep going to learn more. I was really impressed by this. So after the class, they went to read more about stem cell research because they found it so fascinating. Emailed one of the researchers. He invited me to his weekly journal club. We discussed papers from neuroscience journals. We've also discussed the possibility of me working in his lab in the future. This is a first-year student who went out of their way to go after new information they were interested in, to email the researcher. This is a staff scientist, not somebody that's a teacher in the normal classroom. So this student now has a chance to go into that lab in the future, which is, I thought, really cool. And I love this one. For the first time ever, I looked further than Google. All right. But so this is a student that, without being assigned this reading, read several articles from the library about stem cells. So these are students that are motivated. They will go the extra mile. They will work hard when we give them things to be interested in. So they're not unmotivated students. They are engaged. They are engageable. They are fascinating. And so, yeah, you can come up with the sort of rules of thumb about this is how we make classes that students will be motivated to learn, yada, yada, yada. It's true. I mean, there are some best practices. We have called best practices for a reason. Although when I was a teaching fellow, we called it pretty good practices sometimes. Practices that we try and sometimes work. They're not always best practices. But you know, if you give them this interesting and relevant material in an active, social, or creative way, they're going to be excited to learn it. You've got to give them opportunities for authentic practice. Let them practice using it. That whole idea of an authentic audience, so that they're doing it for a reason. It's relevant and it's valuable, and they see the value, and they see how they can use it other than just getting an A on a test. So yeah, you can come up with these rules of thumb. But ultimately, I think the most important question, and this is the last question I have, and I've been as guilty of this as anybody, but really thinking deeply about how would I teach differently if I really believed that my students wanted to learn? If I really, truly, in my gut, came at my teaching from the perspective of these are students that I have to prevent them from learning. They are so excited to learn. They want to learn this stuff. They are hungry to learn this stuff. How might I teach differently? And it doesn't come down to a set of rules or a set of best practices. It comes down to an answer that's probably unique for every single one of us. So I'm posing that question as kind of the final question. And we're leaving you with this idea that, yes, we live in an accelerating world, and learning needs have changed because of this accelerating world. There is a fire hose out there with all that information, and so our teaching has to change. And so we need to shift from this content transmission, right, to engaged learning. We just said, he's kind of summarizing for you, tell them what you told, going to tell them, telling what you tell them, then tell them what you told, whatever. That's a best practice, and I mangled it. Reframe our role in the classroom. Deliberately design our learning environments so that they are interesting, engaging, and authentic. Trust them to be learners. And then I'll leave this slide up here. I had somebody that thought this was so clever that I couldn't bear to not put it up here that helped me say, make the content learnable. So living, engaging, authentically assessed, real-world relevant, and novice-friendly. You have to remember, they're not expert learners yet. They're novices. And that these are the ways that ultimately we'll be able to teach as if learning mattered. Trust them to be learners, trust that they want to learn, and give them the very best of ourselves. So with that, I say thank you, and I think I can take